Forgotten Genius Unveiled. In the shadows of human history, there are stories of diseases so terrifying they become the stuff of legend. They are whispered about not just for their physical devastation, but for the social death they inflict long before the biological one. For millennia, one disease stood above almost all others in its power to inspire dread: leprosy. This wasn't just an illness, it was a curse, a biblical affliction that stripped you of your face, your limbs, and your humanity. Victims were branded as unclean, cast out from their communities, and forced into isolated colonies to waste away in silent agony. The treatments were often worse than the disease itself, a medieval form of torture masquerading as medicine. The most common was an oil derived from the seeds of the chaumugra tree. It was a thick, foul-smelling, viscous liquid that was nearly impossible for the human body to absorb. Doctors would inject it directly into patients' muscles, a process so agonizing that many chose the disease over the cure. The oil would form painful abscesses under the skin, hard as wood, and offered only fleeting, inconsistent relief. The scientific world at the turn of the 20th century was stumped. They knew the oil contained statins that fought the disease, but that something was locked away in a chemical prison, unusable and cruel. The greatest minds in medicine had tried and failed to unlock its secret. The problem seemed insurmountable, and for the millions suffering worldwide, hope was a distant, flickering light. This is the world into which our hero was born. A world of rigid social hierarchies, of blatant sexism, and deeply entrenched racism. A world where the halls of scientific inquiry were almost exclusively reserved for white men. But genius doesn't ask for permission. It simply arrives. Her name was Alice Augusta Ball. Born in Seattle in 1892, she was the descendant of pioneers and innovators. Her grandfather was a renowned photographer, one of the first in the United States to practice daguerreotypy, the earliest form of photography. Chemistry and creativity ran in her blood. Alice was not just smart, she was incandescently brilliant. She excelled in her studies, earning not one but 2 bachelor's degrees from the University of Washington, one in pharmaceutical chemistry and another in pharmacy. In a time when it was a struggle for any woman to even attend college, Alice was shattering expectations. But she was just getting started. She co-authored a paper in the prestigious Journal of the American Chemical Society, a feat unheard of for a woman, let alone a woman of color at that time. Her brilliance became so undeniable that she was offered scholarships from 2 major universities, the University of California, Berkeley, and the College of Hawaii. She chose Hawaii, a decision that would change the fate of millions. In 1915, she became the very first African American and the very first woman to graduate with a master's degree in chemistry from the College of Hawaii. More than that, she was immediately offered a position as a research chemist and instructor, becoming the institution's first female chemistry professor. Think about that for a moment. In 1915, a 23-year-old black woman was not just studying, but teaching chemistry at the university level. It was a staggering achievement that speaks to a mind so powerful it simply could not be ignored, even by the prejudiced systems of the day. It was in this new role, in the lush tropical setting of Hawaii, a place that ironically housed one of the world's most infamous leper colonies on the island of Molokai, that Alice Ball would be handed the impossible problem. Dr. Harry T. Hallman, a physician at the Kalihi Hospital in Honolulu, was frustrated with the horrific chaumugra oil treatment. He had seen its failures firsthand. He knew of Alice's prodigious talent and sought her out. He looked at this young, determined scientist and asked her to do what no one else could: tame the oil. He needed her to isolate the active compounds and create a version that could be injected and absorbed by the body without causing such immense suffering. This was the challenge that would define her life and, tragically, her death. Alice Ball, a young woman who had already overcome so much, stood on the precipice of one of the greatest medical breakthroughs of her century, staring down a monster that had plagued humanity since antiquity. She had no idea that another monster, one of greed and ambition, was waiting in the wings. The breakthrough moment. The laboratory of a great chemist is a place of meticulous order and controlled chaos. It's a world of glass beakers, bubbling liquids, precise measurements, and the patient, relentless pursuit of a single, elusive truth. For Alice Ball, the lab at the College of Hawaii became her sanctuary and her battlefield. The enemy was the chemical structure of chaumugra oil itself. The problem, as she saw it, was one of delivery. The active ingredients in the oil were compounds called fatty acids. These fatty acids had the power to fight the leprosy bacillus, but they were trapped in a thick, oily base that was hydrophobic. It repelled water. Since the human bloodstream is mostly water, injecting the raw oil was like trying to mix oil and water. It simply didn't work. The body couldn't absorb it, so it walled it off, creating those painful, hardened abscesses. Alice knew she couldn't change the fatty acids themselves, but she could change their form. She needed to perform a kind of chemical alchemy, to transform the oil into a substance that was water-soluble or miscible, allowing it to flow freely through the bloodstream and deliver its healing payload directly to the bacteria. Her approach was elegant and methodical. It was a multi-step process that required incredible precision and a deep understanding of organic chemistry. First, she had to break the oil down. She used a process called saponification, the same basic process used to make soap, to convert the fatty acids into salts. These salts were a step closer, but still not ideal for injection. The next and most crucial step was the masterstroke of her genius. She needed to isolate these fatty acids and make them even more bioavailable. She decided to convert them into ethyl esters. In simple terms, an ester is a chemical compound derived from an acid. By reacting the fatty acids with ethyl alcohol, she could create a new substance. This was the eureka moment, though it wasn't a single flash of insight, but the culmination of months of grueling, painstaking work. The resulting ethyl esters of the chaumugra oil were a completely new substance. They were a thin, light liquid that was, for the first time in history, completely water-soluble. She had done it. She had cracked the code. She had created a medicine that could be safely and effectively injected, a silver bullet against a disease that had long been considered invincible. She called her revolutionary technique the Ball method. It was a name that should have been etched into every medical textbook for the next century. With the formula perfected, Dr. Hallman began administering the treatment to patients at Kalihi Hospital. The results were nothing short of miraculous. For the first time, patients were receiving effective relief without the torturous side effects. The medicine flowed through their veins, hunting down the Mycobacterium leprae that had ravaged their bodies. Slowly, miraculously, the symptoms began to recede. Lesions healed. Numbness gave way to feeling. The relentless progression of the disease was halted and, in many cases, reversed. The effect on the patients was profound. These were people who had been sentenced to a living death, torn from their families and stripped of all hope. Now they were being given their lives back. The Ball method was so effective that by 1918, 78 patients had been treated and discharged from Kalihi Hospital, allowed to return to society. This was an unprecedented success.
The news spread like wildfire through the medical community. A cure for leprosy had been found. The isolation, the stigma, the slow decay, it could all be stopped. The discovery was hailed as the miracle of the century. Alice Ball, at just 23 years old, had single-handedly developed the first and only effective treatment for Hansen's disease, a treatment that would remain the gold standard for over 2 decades until the development of sulfone drugs in the 1940s. She stood at the pinnacle of scientific achievement, a brilliant young mind who had gifted the world an incredible cure. But she would never get to publish her findings. She would never see the full global impact of her work. A shadow was looming, and the triumph of her breakthrough moment would soon be eclipsed by a betrayal of the darkest kind.
Block 3. Shadow of Betrayal. In any institution, there is a hierarchy of power. There are the innovators on the front lines, the brilliant minds doing the actual work, and then there are the administrators, the managers, the men who hold the titles and control the resources. At the College of Hawaii, the man at the very top of that pyramid was Dr. Arthur L. Dean. Dean was an accomplished chemist in his own right and, in 1914, had become the president of the college. He was ambitious, politically savvy, and keenly aware of the importance of prestige, both for himself and for the institution he led. He was Alice Ball's boss, and he was watching her work very, very closely. From his lofty position, Dean had a bird's-eye view of the groundbreaking research happening in his chemistry department. He knew that Alice Ball was on the verge of something monumental. A cure for leprosy, developed at his college, would bring international fame and substantial funding. It was the kind of discovery that could define a career and cement a legacy. And Arthur Dean desperately wanted that legacy to be his. The betrayal did not happen overnight. It was a slow, insidious creep. As Alice's research progressed, Dean, as her superior, would have been privy to all her notes, her methodologies, and her results. He was the gatekeeper. In the context of the early 20th century, the power dynamic was grotesquely skewed. Here was a young, 23-year-old African-American woman, a junior member of the faculty. And here was the president of the university, a powerful and established white man. The unspoken assumption in that era was that the work of a subordinate, especially a woman of color, ultimately belonged to the head of the department or institution. Credit was a currency that flowed upwards, and Dean was positioned perfectly at the top. We can only imagine the conversations, the departmental meetings, where Alice would have presented her progress. Dean would have listened, absorbed the details, and perhaps offered guidance, positioning himself not just as an administrator, but as the intellectual shepherd of the project. He was laying the groundwork, subtly intertwining his name with her work in the minds of their colleagues. Then tragedy intervened, creating the perfect opportunity for his ambition to curdle into outright theft. During her intensive research, Alice Ball fell ill. The exact cause remains a mystery, but the most prevalent theory is that she was exposed to chlorine gas in a lab accident during a teaching demonstration. Her health deteriorated rapidly. Forced to abandon her history-making work, she left Hawaii in late 1916 and returned to her family in Seattle for treatment. She was just 24 years old. Her departure left a vacuum. Her research was complete, the formula perfected, the method proven, but it was unpublished. In the world of science, discovery without publication is like a tree falling in an empty forest. It doesn't officially exist. Arthur Dean saw his chance. With Alice gone, there was no one to defend her claim to the work. There was no one to challenge him. He had her notes. He had her method. He had the results from the ongoing, successful treatments at Kalihi Hospital. All the pieces were on the table, and the primary author was 1,000 miles away, fighting for her life. The shadow of betrayal wasn't just looming anymore, it was beginning to stretch across the entire project, ready to engulf the light of Alice Ball's genius. Dean knew the immense value of what she had created, and in her absence, he began to see it not as her discovery, but as his opportunity. The stage was set for one of the most egregious acts of intellectual theft in the history of medicine. Block 4. The ultimate erasure. On the very last day of 1916, on December 31st, the brilliant light of Alice Ball's mind was extinguished. She died in Seattle at the age of 24, her body succumbing to the illness that had forced her home. She never got to formally publish her findings, never got to receive the accolades she so profoundly deserved, and never knew that her name was about to be systematically scrubbed from the history she had just made. Her death was not just a tragedy, it was an opening. For Arthur Dean, the death of his young, brilliant researcher was the final critical piece that allowed his plan to click into place. With Alice Ball silenced forever, there was no one left to contradict him. What happened next was a cold, calculated act of academic plagiarism on a breathtaking scale. Dean simply picked up where Alice had left off. He took her meticulous research, her groundbreaking technique, and all of her data. He, along with his colleagues, began to mass-produce the injectable chaulmoogra oil solution based entirely on her work. They scaled up the production, supplying the treatment to hospitals across Hawaii and, eventually, the world. But when the time came to publish, he committed the ultimate betrayal. In 1920, Dean published a paper detailing the method for isolating the ethyl esters from the oil. In that paper, and in all subsequent reports, he made no mention of Alice Ball. Not a footnote, not a citation, not a passing acknowledgement of the young woman who had laid the entire foundation for the discovery. It was as if she had never existed. He didn't just forget her, he actively erased her. He then had the audacity to name the technique after himself. The Ball method was dead and buried with its creator. In its place rose the Dean method. And the world, unaware of the theft, celebrated Arthur Dean as the hero. He was lauded as the brilliant chemist who had finally conquered leprosy. The discovery brought immense prestige to him and to the College of Hawaii. He was hailed as a savior. The injustice is staggering. He stole her life's work at the exact moment she could no longer defend it. He built his legacy on the foundation of her genius and then buried her name beneath it. And the system allowed it to happen. Why did no one speak up? Dr. Hallman, the physician who had originally commissioned Alice's work, knew the truth. But he was just one voice against the powerful narrative being pushed by the president of the university. In the deeply hierarchical, racist, and sexist society of the 1920s, who would listen to a lone doctor defending the legacy of a deceased young black woman against the word of a powerful white man? The institutions of science and academia, which are supposed to be bastions of truth and integrity, failed completely. They accepted the Dean method without question. For decades, medical students learned about Arthur Dean's great breakthrough. Doctors around the world administered the Dean method to save their patients. Millions of people were cured by Alice Ball's genius, all while attributing their salvation to the man who had stolen her name. Her contribution was not just marginalized, it was annihilated. It was a theft so complete, so profound, that for nearly a century, the world's deadliest disease was believed to have been cured by the wrong person. This was the ultimate erasure, a testament to how easily history can be rewritten by those in power, and how the voices of the most brilliant and vulnerable among us can be silenced.
Block 5. Reclaiming her legacy. Truth, however, has a stubborn way of surviving. Even when buried under decades of lies and institutional silence, it can find a way to the surface. The first attempt to correct the record came just a few years after the theft. In 1922, Dr. Harry Hallman, the man who had first believed in Alice's talent, published a paper of his own. In it, he tried to wrench history back onto its proper course. He pointedly and repeatedly referred to the treatment as the Ball method, giving a detailed account of her foundational work and her singular role in the discovery. He wrote, "After a great deal of experimental work, Miss Ball solved the problem for me. It was a brave and righteous act, a lone voice crying out in the wilderness of established falsehood. But it was not enough. The momentum behind the Dean method was too great. The name was already in the textbooks, the credit already assigned. Dr. Hallman's paper was a crucial piece of evidence, but it was largely ignored by the wider medical community, a footnote in a story that had already been written by the victor. For the next 50 years, Alice Ball's name remained lost to all but a handful of historical archives. The real reclamation of her legacy began in the 1970s, a time of social change and a renewed interest in uncovering the hidden histories of women and people of color. Researchers, digging through the archives of the University of Hawaii, began to piece together the puzzle. A retired professor named Stanley Ollie found Dr. Hallman's 1922 paper and realized the profound injustice it described. He and other scholars, like Dr. Catherine Takara, began a decades-long campaign to bring Alice Ball's story to light. They meticulously documented her achievements, cross-referencing university records, chemical publications, and personal letters. They unearthed the truth that had been intentionally buried. They championed her cause, refusing to let her legacy remain stolen. Their tireless work slowly began to bear fruit. The University of Hawaii, the very institution that had once erased her, finally began to acknowledge its past. The true moment of recognition came in the year 2000. The university officially and formally recognized Alice Ball as the true discoverer of the treatment. They dedicated a bronze plaque to her memory, placing it at the base of the campus's only Chalmugra tree. The governor of Hawaii went a step further, declaring February 29th Alice Ball Day, an official day to honor her life and her monumental achievement. It was a correction that was nearly 90 years overdue, but it was a correction nonetheless. Her story is a powerful, painful example of a phenomenon known as the Matilda effect, where the contributions of female scientists are systematically misattributed to their male colleagues. She stands alongside figures like Rosalind Franklin, whose critical work on the structure of DNA was used without proper credit by Watson and Crick. Alice Ball's story is more than just a historical anecdote. It is a critical lesson. It's a reminder that we must constantly question the histories we are taught and actively seek out the voices that have been silenced. It is a testament to the fact that genius knows no race and no gender, but opportunity and recognition often do. So, the next time you read about a great discovery, take a moment. Remember Alice Ball. Remember the brilliant young woman who cured the world's deadliest disease only to have her name stolen. Her story has finally been reclaimed, ensuring that her sacrifice and her genius will never be forgotten again.